You're no longer welcome in my world." Those were the words my daughter Sophia hurled at me on the night of her engagement party, in front of 200 of Newport Beach's finest. The chandeliers sparkled, the champagne flowed, but in that single sentence, my entire life as a father seemed to collapse. Sophia had just inherited $40 million, and suddenly the man who raised her, the man who taught her to ride a bike, who stayed up late checking her homework, who worked construction sites under the California sun, was nothing but an embarrassment. She thought wealth had elevated her into a new world, one where honesty, loyalty, and family ties no longer mattered. But what Sophia didn't know was that her inheritance wasn't as unconditional as she believed. Hidden in the fine print of the trust her late mother left behind were rules so precise, so ironclad, that one wrong move could undo everything she thought she had built. That night, as she smiled for photographers in her designer gown, she didn't realize every dismissive word, every insult, every time she had pushed me aside for appearances was about to catch up with her. And when it did, the fallout would shake not only her glittering world, but every relationship she thought money had secured. Before we continue, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Because what happened next wasn't just about money, it was about respect, choices, and the price of forgetting where you came from. Sophia wasn't always like this. There was a time, not so long ago, when she would run into my arms at the end of a long workday, her hair smelling of crayons and sunshine, telling me all about the pictures she drew at school. After Linda, my wife, passed away 7 years ago, it was just the two of us, and I poured every ounce of myself into raising her. I packed lunches, showed up at parent-teacher conferences still wearing my hard hat, and made sure she never missed a birthday party, even if I had to drive across the state to get back from a job site. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. We had a small 2-story house in Glendale, and though the paint chipped and the truck often needed fixing, that house was filled with memories: her first prom dress, the backyard barbecues, and Linda's laughter echoing in the kitchen. But things began to shift when Sophia married Nathaniel Collins, a man whose family name opened doors in Palm Springs society. They lived in a world of manicured golf courses, luxury resorts, and silent wealth that spoke volumes. Suddenly, my steel-toed boots and weathered hands didn't fit the picture Sophia wanted to paint. It started with subtle remarks like telling me to dress a little better at holiday gatherings or suggesting I leave early before the real dinner began. By the time she joined the Newport Beach Country Club, the hints had become daggers. At Christmas, she actually apologized to Nathaniel's parents for my rough edges when I poured them wine. It stung, but I bit my tongue because she was my only child and because love for your children doesn't just switch off. Then came her inheritance, $40 million from a Morrison family trust I hadn't even known existed until Linda's passing. The terms were straightforward on paper. Donate $600,000 annually to charity, maintain respectful relationships with surviving family, and submit yearly reports, proving both conditions were satisfied. The attorneys emphasized these clauses, warning her that the money came with responsibility, not just privilege. Sophia smiled, signed, and promptly forgot. Almost overnight, she transformed. Out went the Toyota Corolla she drove through college. In came a Maserati with custom leather. She traded her modest apartment for a penthouse on Wilshire Boulevard with floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the Pacific. Shopping trips became events in themselves, her closets filling with gowns that cost more than my entire truck. She began using phrases like, "my kind of people," and when she said them, her eyes flicked toward me as if to remind me I wasn't included. The lowest point or so, I thought at the time, came when she invited me to lunch at the country club. I remember ironing my cleanest shirt, polishing my boots until they shone, and walking in with a flicker of hope that maybe this was her way of reconnecting. Instead, she handed me a card for an image consultant, telling me I needed to learn how to present myself. She wanted me to say I was retired rather than admit I worked construction. I asked her, calmly, if nearly 3 decades of being her father didn't count for something. She looked away and whispered, "Not anymore, Dad. Not in my world." I left that day knowing something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was resolve. You see, what Sophia didn't realize was that I had been documenting everything for years. Every dismissive comment, every event where she relegated me to the sidelines, every text message where she told friends I wouldn't understand sophisticated company. I had recordings too, including her exact words at the club. "I'm not proud of what you do." When Linda's attorney, Catherine Lewis, gave me her card at the funeral years ago, she said, "If you ever need help, call me." I'd kept that card in my wallet without knowing whether I'd ever use it. After that lunch, I finally picked up the phone. Catherine listened quietly as I laid out the evidence. She told me the terms of the inheritance weren't just symbolic, they were enforceable. If Sophia continued down this path, she stood to lose everything. She also warned me this would be a point of no return. If the committee reviewed the case and found her in violation, there would be no more second chances, except for one. She would be given 72 hours to make a public acknowledgement of respect toward me. If she did, the matter would close. If she didn't, the inheritance would vanish. I wrestled with the decision, torn between a father's instinct to protect his child and a man's need for dignity. In the end, I chose both because protecting my child also meant protecting her from becoming someone completely hollow. The test would come at her engagement party, surrounded by 200 people from the world she so desperately wanted to belong to. It was the perfect stage for her to show whether she valued money more than family. I pressed my best work shirt, shined my boots again, and decided I'd walk into that ballroom not as someone ashamed of who he was, but as the man who built bridges, highways, and a life that mattered even if my daughter couldn't see it yet. The Newport Beach Country Club sparkled that September evening, as if every chandelier had been lit just to celebrate Sophia's arrival into her new life. 200 guests, a $50,000 budget, and a ballroom decorated with orchids flown in from Hawaii. It was everything she had dreamed of. I arrived in my best clothes, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, and my polished boots, not trying to pass as something I wasn't, but showing respect for the occasion. The valet gave me a curious look when I declined to hand over keys to anything but my Chevy Silverado, but I smiled and walked through those marble doors with my head held high. Sophia met me at the entrance. Her gown a $12,000 Oscar de la Renta creation, her smile polite but cold. "Dad, you came," she said, hugging me just long enough for the cameras, then pulling back to whisper that we needed to talk before I met anyone. Important. She guided me toward the bar, her eyes darting around the room, making sure none of the elite noticed her tension. "Dad," she began, "these people are potential business partners. Nathaniel's family has connections that could mean everything for us. The Bennetts are here. They control hundreds of millions in development funds. Tonight matters." I nodded, wondering where this was going. Then she leaned closer. "Please just say you're in project development, or management, something that sounds more professional." I kept my voice steady. "Sophia, I am professional. I run crews of 50 people. I manage projects worth millions. I'm a construction foreman, and I'm proud of that." Her jaw clenched. "That's not what they'll hear. They'll hear manual labor, not sophistication. Our kind of people expect more." Her words stung, but before I could answer, Richard and Caroline Bennett swept into the room. Richard, silver-haired in a custom Italian suit, extended a hand. "Sophia, darling, the party is divine." She beamed, air-kissing Caroline, then turned to me with a rehearsed smile. "I'd like you to meet my father." Richard shook my hand, his grip soft from years behind a desk rather than a shovel. "And what line of work are you in, Mr. Harris?" This was Sophia's moment to either honor the truth or continue her charade. She hesitated, then forced out the lie. "Dad's in development. Large-scale projects, very complex." Richard nodded approvingly, intrigued. Caroline added warmly, "We're always looking for strong development partners. Perhaps we should schedule a lunch." Sophia's shoulders relaxed, as though she had successfully navigated a minefield. But I wasn't about to let my life's work be reduced to a facade. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the music, "I should clarify, I'm not in development. I'm a construction foreman. I supervise crews and make sure bridges, highways, and buildings go up safely and on time." Richard's polite smile faltered. Caroline's expression cooled. "Well, that's honest work," she said with forced cheer. Within a minute, they excused themselves. Sophia's fingers dug into my arm like claws. "What was that?" she hissed. "That was honesty," I answered. That was sabotage, she snapped. Do you have any idea what you just cost me? The Bennetts could have opened doors that matter, and now they think we're unsophisticated. I looked her in the eye. Sophia, when did I become an embarrassment? When did the man who raised you, paid for your schooling, and walked you down the aisle become someone you hide? She looked away, scanning the glittering room. I'm trying to build something here, Dad. A life, a reputation, connections that matter. You don't fit into that. Her words cut deep, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was work. Jennifer, my assistant, was calling to confirm overtime approvals for a Denver project and to update me about a Forbes interview. I handled the call in 30 seconds flat, then noticed Sophia staring at me, her face twisted with confusion. What kind of foreman gets calls from Forbes? She asked. I shrugged. The kind with responsibilities you don't understand. She frowned, dismissing it as me exaggerating. Before I could explain, Nathaniel arrived with another couple, Harrison and Melissa Parker. Harrison, broad-shouldered with hands rough from years in the field, shook mine firmly. Bradley tells me you're in construction. What kind of projects? Infrastructure, I said simply. Highways, bridges, commercial towers. Harrison's eyes lit up. Which company? Harris Infrastructure Group, I replied. Harrison nearly dropped his glass. Wait, Harris Infrastructure? You work for Michael Harris? Sophia stiffened beside me, expecting a lie. I stayed silent. Harrison grinned. That man's a legend. Built a $3.5 billion empire from the ground up. Revolutionized cost-efficient building methods. Forbes billionaire list. I've been trying to meet him for years. Sophia's face drained of color. Dad, she whispered. How long have you worked there? Before I could answer, Catherine Lewis appeared at my side with a leather briefcase. Michael, sorry to interrupt, but we need to talk. Sophia recognized her instantly, her mother's attorney. Why is she here? She demanded. Catherine's expression was solemn. Sophia, this concerns your inheritance. There are serious concerns about your compliance with the respect clauses. The room stilled. Guests began drifting toward us, sensing drama. Sophia panicked. Not here, she muttered. Catherine stood firm. It must be addressed. And in that moment, instead of seeking privacy, instead of taking responsibility, Sophia raised her voice for everyone to hear. Fine, let's do it here, because I'm tired of pretending my father's rough hands and dirty boots belong in my life. The music faltered. Conversations froze, and every guest on the terrace turned to listen as Sophia publicly humiliated me, not realizing she had just triggered the very clause that would take her $40 million away forever. Sophia's voice rose above the hum of polite conversation like a siren, sharp and cutting, each word another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. My father thinks I should be grateful for his sacrifices, she announced to the terrace full of Newport Beach elites, her champagne flute trembling in her manicured hand. My mother's attorney thinks I should follow rules written by dead people who never even knew me, but none of you understand what I've achieved. I've built a life worth living, surrounded by people who appreciate excellence, who know the difference between success and manual labor. The guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, unsure if they should leave or stay. She turned on me, her eyes glittering with pride and anger. Fine, Dad. You want respect? Here's respect. You're a construction worker. You drive a beat-up truck. You wear work boots to formal events and have no idea how to behave in sophisticated company. I appreciate you raised me after Mom died, but that doesn't mean I have to spend the rest of my life apologizing for where I came from. She set her glass down with a hard clink. And if honoring some dusty inheritance clause means pretending that pouring concrete is equivalent to building a real career, then maybe I don't want the inheritance at all. I've got Nathaniel, I've got my new life, I've got everything I want. So if the committee wants to take their $40 million and give it to someone else, they can go right ahead. Dad, you're no longer welcome in my life. Not at my home, not at my events, not in my social circle. I'm done being embarrassed by you. For a moment there was complete silence except for the soft clinking of ice in forgotten glasses. I felt my chest tighten, not from humiliation, but from a deep sadness I hadn't known in years. Before I could speak, Harrison Parker stepped forward. Sophia, he said quietly but firmly, I think you should know something about your father. Harrison, don't, I began, but he held up a hand. No, Michael, she needs to hear this. He addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what family drama we just witnessed, but I do know this. Michael Harris isn't just a construction worker. Sophia rolled her eyes, still clinging to her image. Harrison, please don't try to make this. Michael Harris is the founder and CEO of Harris Infrastructure Group, Harrison said, his voice carrying across the terrace. The silence that followed was absolute. A company worth $3.5 billion. His firm built half the infrastructure in California, including the very building we're standing in tonight. He's ranked in the Forbes billionaire list. His personal net worth is estimated at over $2 billion. You could almost hear the air being sucked out of the party. Faces turned toward me, eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire. Harrison looked back at Sophia. So when you say he's just a construction worker who doesn't understand sophisticated company, I think you might want to reconsider that assessment. Sophia's face went from defiant to ashen. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Dad, she said softly, is that true? I met her gaze steady and calm. Every word. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Catherine Lewis cleared her throat. Sophia, in light of your public statements tonight, I'm afraid the Inheritance Committee has no choice but to proceed with immediate forfeiture proceedings. Sophia's head snapped toward her. Wait, what? You have 72 hours to vacate any property purchased with inheritance funds and return all assets to the estate, Catherine said, her tone crisp but not unkind. But I didn't know. Ignorance of your father's wealth doesn't excuse your behavior toward him. The inheritance terms were clear. Maintain respectful relationships with surviving family members. You've done the opposite, and you did it publicly in front of witnesses. Catherine closed her briefcase and handed Sophia a card. If you'd like to contest the decision, you can call my office, though given tonight's performance, I wouldn't recommend it. She turned to me. Michael, the committee will need you to sign the transfer documents. Can you come by the office Thursday morning? I'll be there, I said quietly. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring, their champagne now flat and forgotten. Sophia stood frozen, her gown shimmering under the terrace lights, her perfect party unraveling like a poorly stitched seam. For years she had curated an image of belonging to a world of marble floors and silent power, but in one evening she had exposed its foundation of arrogance and disrespect. I watched her, not with triumph but with a heavy heart, because no father wants to see his child learn this kind of lesson in public. Finally, she found her voice. Dad, wait. We need to talk. I looked at her one last time, the girl I had raised, the woman who had chosen status over loyalty. No, Sophia, I said quietly. We really don't. Then I turned and walked toward the parking garage, leaving her standing alone in her $12,000 dress, having just lost $40 million because she was too proud to respect the man who raised her. As I stepped into the cool night air, the music from the ballroom drifted faintly behind me, the party continuing for everyone else but over for my daughter. Actions have consequences, even for inheritance money. The parking garage was quiet, except for the sound of my boots against the concrete. I had made it halfway to my truck when I heard Sophia's heels clicking rapidly behind me. Dad, please wait, she called, her voice cracking, desperation replacing the arrogance she had worn like armor all evening. I stopped, but didn't turn right away. When I finally faced her, she looked smaller somehow, her expensive gown suddenly out of place against the cold cement pillars. Dad, I need to understand what just happened up there. Are you really Michael Harris, the billionaire? I shook my head slowly. I'm Michael Harris, your father. The rest is business. She blinked, confused. But you drive an old truck. You live in that little house in Glendale. You wear boots to formal events. Why would you live like that if you had all this money? I sighed, my voice steady. Because that's who I am. The money doesn't change me. I built Harris Infrastructure Group from nothing over 25 years. I stayed modest because it reminded me of what matters. But you never asked, Sophia. You assumed. Her eyes filled with tears, mascara smudging down her cheeks. Dad, I didn't know. I thought you were just struggling. I stepped closer. When did I ever tell you I was struggling? I never complained. I never asked you for money. You saw a modest house, a pickup truck, and you decided that meant I was less. But I chose that life because it kept me grounded. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, lost for words. Tell me something, I asked, my voice soft but sharp. If you'd known about the billions 5 years ago, would you have treated me differently? Would you have been proud of me for what I built? Or would you have been proud of me for what I could buy you? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I had my answer. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You treated me exactly the way you treated the inheritance, as something to flaunt when convenient and hide when embarrassing. Sophia shook her head furiously. No, Dad, that's not fair. Tonight, when Harrison said your name, I was shocked, that's all. I didn't raise my voice. And after the shock wore off, what did you feel? Pride in me? Or excitement about what it meant for your social status? Her silence told me everything. Sophia, I've spent 25 years building schools, hospitals, bridges, and jobs for thousands of families. I've donated $500 million to charities quietly, anonymously, because helping people doesn't need applause. And in return, you couldn't even acknowledge me as your father without shame. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders trembling. Dad, I can change. Please, I can change. I studied her the same way I studied a blueprint to see if the foundation could hold. Can you? Or will you pretend until you get what you want again? I mean it this time, she whispered. I can prove it. I leaned against my truck. Then answer me one question honestly. If I were only a foreman with no billions, no empire, no Forbes ranking, would you want me in your life? She opened her mouth, closed it, hesitated too long. That pause was the truth. I opened the truck door. When you figure out how to love people for who they are instead of what they have, call me. Until then, we have nothing to discuss. Dad, please, she begged, reaching out, as if to hold me there. We can start over. Ask me again. I climbed in, turned the key, and met her eyes one last time. It doesn't matter what you say now. What matters is what you showed me for 5 years. She flinched as if I'd struck her. I love you, Sophia, I added softly. I always will, but love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. Goodbye. As the engine roared to life, I pulled away, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror, framed by harsh fluorescent lights. She stood there broken, finally realizing the difference between wealth and worth. The next morning, calls began flooding Catherine Lewis's office 43 from Sophia in 3 days. 17 voicemails begging, bargaining, apologizing. Catherine told me she had explained clearly. The committee would convene Monday at 9 a.m. to decide her fate, and based on her very public outburst, forfeiture was inevitable. By Wednesday, it was official. Sophia's Maserati was repossessed at noon outside a Beverly Hills cafe. The penthouse she had flaunted on social media went into foreclosure, and the country club terminated her membership. The headlines spread quickly. Heiress loses. $40 million after public family feud. Nathaniel's family, once eager to boast of her inheritance, pulled away almost instantly. By Friday, the engagement was quietly called off. I didn't gloat. There was no joy in watching my daughter lose everything. But there was justice, the kind of justice that comes when actions meet consequences. That weekend, as I sat in my modest kitchen sipping black coffee, I realized the truth I had always known. Money can buy comfort, but respect, true respect, has to be earned, one choice at a time. Monday morning arrived gray and cool, the kind of morning where the ocean breeze carries a bite that makes you tighten your jacket just a little more. I sat in Catherine Lewis's glass-walled conference room, overlooking downtown Los Angeles, the very skyline my company had helped shape. Highways snaked across the city. Bridges arched gracefully over rivers, and towers gleamed in the sunlight, all reminders of the decades of work that had built Harris Infrastructure Group into what it was. Catherine walked in carrying a stack of folders and placed them carefully on the table. Michael, she began, the Inheritance Committee met at 9 sharp. 3 attorneys, 2 family advisors, 1 independent mediator. They reviewed everything, your daughter's texts, her public statements, the recordings, Saturday night's performance at the party. The decision was unanimous. Complete forfeiture. She slid a document toward me, her tone steady but not without sympathy. Sophia has 70. 2 hours to return all assets purchased with inheritance funds, the penthouse, the Maserati, the jewelry, even the country club membership. As for the 5 million in cash she spent, she'll be required to repay it. If she cannot, collection procedures will begin. I scanned the legal notice. It was thorough, final, the language cold but clear. Catherine studied my face. The committee also authorized transfer of the 40 million to you as the surviving family member. All you have to do is sign here. My pen hovered over the page, but I didn't put it down. What happens if I refuse? She looked surprised. Then the money reverts to the estate. Under the terms Linda's grandmother established, it would go to a charitable trust supporting children's hospitals and scholarships. I leaned back, thinking of Linda, of the lessons she believed in, of the kind of legacy she wanted her family to carry. Then that's where it will go, I said finally. Catherine blinked. You're certain, Michael? This is $40 million. I'm certain. I don't need it. I've already built something of my own, and this way Linda's grandmother's values will live on. Catherine nodded slowly, making a note in the file. Very well. The charitable trust will be established by Friday. 43 scholarships and 2 new hospital wings will be funded immediately. She paused, her voice softer. Sophia has been calling constantly. She left 17 voicemails yesterday alone. I exhaled. What did she want? To apologize, to negotiate, to beg. Catherine's eyes met mine. Do you want me to file a restraining order to give you some peace? I shook my head. No. She's still my daughter. If she calls, she calls. Whether I answer is my choice. Catherine gathered the folders back into her briefcase, her expression thoughtful. The committee commended you for how you handled this. Most men in your position would have used their wealth to force compliance. Instead, you let the terms speak for themselves. They were fair, I said simply. She ignored them. Catherine hesitated at the door. Michael, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you think Sophia will learn from this? I stared out the window at the city below. Cars streamed along highways we had built. People walked into buildings our crews had raised from bare earth. Lives moved forward on the foundation of my work. I hope so, I said finally. But learning requires accepting responsibility. Saturday night she blamed everyone except herself. Catherine's heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she walked me to the elevator. If she does learn, will you forgive her? I nodded. I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the last 5 years didn't happen. If she wants to rebuild, it will take more than words. It will take proof. Evidence. She understands the difference between wealth and character. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Catherine's voice followed me. Any regrets about not telling her who you really were sooner? The doors began to close. None, I said. If I had, I never would have learned who she really was. By Wednesday, the consequences were visible to everyone. Sophia's Bentley replacement, the Maserati she loved showing off, was repossessed in broad daylight outside a Beverly Hills cafe, the kind of place where appearances matter more than the food. The repo agent waited politely until she finished her salad, then handed her the paperwork in front of half a dozen women she had been trying to impress. That evening, the penthouse went into foreclosure. The next morning, the country club canceled her membership, citing non-payment. Within 48 hours, the credit card companies followed. Accounts frozen as the banks realized her inheritance had been revoked. By Friday, the engagement was over. Nathaniel's family, once eager to boast of their future connection to millions, cut ties swiftly. I didn't hear it from Sophia, but from Harrison Parker, who called to apologize for outing my identity at the party. I thought she needed to know, he admitted, but it wasn't my place. How are you handling the attention? I hadn't seen the paper yet, but he told me the Los Angeles Business Journal had run a story that morning. Construction billionaire's daughter loses fortune in public feud. I thanked him for the call, but when I hung up, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the steady weight of reality pressing in. My daughter had lost everything, but not because of me, because of choices she had made, choices that revealed who she had become. And now she had to face the truth. You cannot build a life on arrogance and expect it to stand when the foundation is nothing but sand. Sophia disappeared from the spotlight almost overnight, her name whispered in social circles that only weeks before had embraced her as one of their own. The woman who had once boasted about her penthouse views of the Pacific was now staying on couches, borrowing clothes, and avoiding the very people she had tried so hard to impress. I knew because word spread fast in Newport Beach. Reputations there are currency, and hers had been bankrupted along with her accounts. A week after the committee's decision, Nathaniel himself called me. His tone was polite, but beneath it lay uncertainty. Mr. Harris, or should I say Mr. Harris the billionaire, I need to ask you something about Sophia. I leaned back in my chair, listening. What about her? She's been staying with friends. She can't afford her own place anymore. She's panicking. She doesn't know how to live without money. Is there any way you can help her? Just enough to get back on her feet. His voice cracked, betraying more concern for what her downfall meant for him than for her. Why would I do that? I asked plainly. Because she's your daughter. I let the silence stretch. Tell me, Nathaniel, if Sophia had never inherited a dime, if she were just a woman working an ordinary job, would you still want to marry her? He hesitated far too long. I love her, he said finally. But the words sounded rehearsed, uncertain, like lines from a play where he'd forgotten his cue. That's not what I asked. Would you marry her without the fortune? More silence than a sigh. I didn't need to hear more. I see, I said. Good luck, Nathaniel. Within a week, the engagement was called off. Sophia, once paraded around as the prized bride-to-be, was now another cautionary tale whispered about in country club lounges and high-end boutiques. But beneath the shame, I sensed something beginning to crack open in her. One evening, about 10 days later, I returned home from a late meeting and found her sitting on my porch steps. Her gown and jewelry were gone, replaced by jeans, a faded t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her face was pale from sleepless nights. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, her voice stripped of its usual confidence. I stood there for a moment, watching her, remembering the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movie nights. Finally, I sat beside her. "What do you want to say, Sophia?" She took a shaky breath. "I want to apologize. For everything. For treating you like you were worthless. For being ashamed of honest work. For caring more about what strangers thought of me than about the man who raised me. For Saturday night, for the words I said in front of everyone. For 5 years of being a terrible daughter." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice didn't waver. "And I want to apologize for never asking about your work, your dreams, or what you built. I assumed that because you didn't show off, you didn't have anything to show. And I especially want to apologize for only caring about your feelings after I found out about your money." She buried her face in her hands. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence sit between us like mortar, filling in the cracks of what had broken. Finally, I asked, "What are you going to do now?" She wiped her eyes. "I don't know. I've never had to live without money. I don't even know how to pay bills or cook more than pasta." "Then that's where you start," I said gently. "You figure out who you are without money defining you." She nodded, her shoulders sagging, as though the weight of years of arrogance had finally come loose. For the next few months, I heard bits and pieces. She rented a small apartment in Glendale with a roommate. She sold off her designer clothes to consignment shops and learned to stretch grocery money. She took the bus to job interviews and finally landed an entry-level position as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit helping underprivileged kids earn scholarships. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She called me one Tuesday afternoon, her voice different, scared. Yes, but also steadier. "Dad, I got a job," she said. "It doesn't pay much, but they work with kids who need scholarships. It feels good to be there." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "How do you feel about it?" Scared, hopeful, grateful someone. Gave me a chance despite everything I've done. Over time, she started cooking her own meals, shopping at thrift stores, and even volunteering on weekends at a homeless shelter. She wrote letters of apology to the people she had hurt, not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge her mistakes. She started seeing a therapist to understand why she had let wealth become her only measure of worth. 6 months later, she asked if we could have dinner, just the two of us. As I listened to her over the phone, I thought about the little girl who had once been so full of life, the teenager who called me every night her first semester away at college, the young woman who had lost her way when money clouded her vision. For the first time in years, I believed she might be finding her way back. And as I set the phone down, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I was proud of my daughter, not for what she had, but for who she was becoming. Friday evening arrived quietly, without the flashbulbs or champagne glasses that had defined so many of Sophia's former gatherings. We agreed to meet at a small Italian restaurant in Pasadena, the kind of place where the tablecloths were simple, the pasta was handmade, and nobody cared about last names or net worth. I arrived a little early, out of habit, and watched through the window as she walked up the street. There was no designer dress this time, no jewelry that sparkled under streetlights, only a modest blouse, a second-hand coat, and hair tied back in a loose braid. When she spotted me, she hesitated for a moment, as if she wasn't sure she belonged there with me, then pushed open the door and smiled shyly. "Hi, Dad." I stood to hug her, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. We sat, ordered water and a simple appetizer, and for a while we didn't talk about the past at all. We spoke about her new job, the small apartment she shared with a roommate, the bus rides that taught her patience, and the way her coworkers treated her like she mattered, even though her title was small. There was pride in her voice, not for wealth or image, but for surviving each day without the safety net she had once taken for granted. At one point she looked down at her hands, once adorned with manicures and diamonds, now bare and a little rough from chores she used to pay others to do. "Dad, sometimes I wake up and feel ashamed of how I treated you. I can't believe the things I said, the way I acted, the arrogance I carried. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling ashamed." I set my fork down and leaned closer. Shame can be useful if it leads to growth. The question is whether you use it as fuel to become better, or as an excuse to stay stuck in regret. She nodded slowly. "I want to use it to grow. I want to earn back your respect, even if it takes years." I studied her face, searching for pretense, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't see calculation. I saw sincerity. After dinner, we walked outside into the cool evening air. The streets were alive with the sounds of families strolling, couples laughing, and musicians playing soft tunes on corners. Sophia slipped her hands into her coat pockets. "Dad, I know saying sorry isn't enough. I know forgiveness isn't the same as erasing the past. But I want to build something real with you again. Not the life I had, not the life I lost, but something new." We walked in silence for a few blocks, the night wrapping around us. Finally, I spoke. "Sophia, I forgave you the night you hurt me the most. Forgiveness isn't the hard part. The hard part is trust, and trust takes time. You can't buy it back. You can only earn it through choices." She bit her lip, then nodded. "Then I'll keep choosing differently, every day, until maybe one day you believe in me again." In the months that followed, she kept her word. She called me not to ask for help, but to share small victories, learning to cook a new dish, paying her rent on time, finishing a project at work that helped a teenager get a scholarship. Each story carried pride, not in money, but in effort. I saw a different woman emerging, one who understood that value isn't measured in bank accounts or ballrooms, but in honesty, humility, and perseverance. One Sunday morning, she surprised me by showing up at my house with groceries. "I thought I'd cook for us," she said, and though the meal was clumsy and the pasta overcooked, I ate every bite with gratitude. We sat afterward on the porch steps, the same ones where months earlier she had broken down in tears, and I realized we were building something stronger than before. Not a return to what had been lost, but a foundation for what could be. One evening she asked me, "Do you think people can really change?" I thought about all the bridges I had overseen in my career, structures that began as bare earth and steel beams, transformed into pathways that carried thousands safely each day. "Yes," I said. "But like any construction, change requires a strong foundation and constant work. You can't just throw it together. You build it piece by piece, and sometimes you have to tear down what's rotten before you can rebuild." She smiled faintly, as if the metaphor gave her hope. Half a year later, she was still at the nonprofit, still riding buses, still renting the small apartment, and still working on herself. For the first time in years, I looked at her not as the daughter who had betrayed me, but as the woman who was trying to find her way back with honesty. And though the road ahead would be long, I finally believed she might just make it. Spring came to California with a gentler sun, and the kind of breeze that made even the busiest streets feel calmer, and with it came a new rhythm in my relationship with Sophia. She had been working at the nonprofit for nearly a year now, her days filled with paperwork, phone calls, and the quiet satisfaction of helping underprivileged kids get a shot at college. It was not glamorous, not lucrative, but for the first time she was proud of something that had nothing to do with wealth. She called me one Tuesday evening, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "Dad, do you think we could have dinner again? Just us, no special occasion, no apologies, just dinner." I agreed, and this time she chose a small diner near her apartment, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of coffee that never leaves the air. When I walked in, she was already there, sipping water and flipping through a paperback novel she had bought secondhand. She looked up and smiled, not with the forced confidence of someone trying to impress, but with the warmth of a daughter who was simply happy to see her father. We talked for hours. She told me about a teenager she had helped secure a scholarship, about the satisfaction of budgeting her paycheck to last the whole month, about the lessons she was learning in therapy as she unraveled the insecurities that had once made her cling to status. I listened, nodding, adding only when necessary, but inside I felt a cautious pride. This was a woman reshaping herself from the inside out. At one point she looked at me and said, "Dad, I know you forgave me, but I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I just want a chance to build something new with you. Will you let me try?" Her eyes were wet, her voice trembling, but she held my gaze. "Sophia," I said softly, "I already let you try. Every dinner we share, every phone call, every moment we spend talking about real things that is us rebuilding. Trust doesn't happen all at once. It grows like a bridge, one beam at a time. And right now, I see the work you're doing. That matters more than any words." She nodded, relief visible in her shoulders. The following weeks, she continued to show small but meaningful signs of change. She invited me to her apartment, a modest two-bedroom she shared with her roommate, and cooked me dinner again. The food was simple grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, but she had made it with care, and we laughed when the smoke alarm went off after she forgot about the oven. Later, we sat on her tiny balcony with mugs of tea, looking out at the city lights. She turned to me and said, "Do you think Mom would be proud of me now?" I took a deep breath, remembering Linda's warmth, her belief in values over vanity. "I think Mom would be proud that you're learning to stand on your own 2 feet, that you're finally discovering who you are without money telling you. And yes, she would be proud of this version of you." Sophia wiped at her eyes, then whispered, "I wish she were here to see it." I put an arm around her shoulders. "So do I." Around that time, she also began reconnecting with old friends, people she had once discarded when she thought they didn't fit her new life. She apologized to them, not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the pain she caused. Some accepted, others did not, but the effort itself was proof of her growth. The nonprofit where she worked eventually offered her more responsibility, trusting her to coordinate scholarship applications. It wasn't a promotion in the traditional sense, but it was recognition that she was dependable. She called me the day she signed the paperwork. "Dad, they trust me now," she said, her voice lit with excitement. "Not because of who I'm related to or what I have, but because of what I've done. Do you know how good that feels?" I smiled into the phone. "Yes, Sophia, I know exactly how that feels." One Sunday afternoon we sat in my backyard, the same patch of grass where she had once learned to ride a bike. She looked around at the weathered fence, the modest house, the tools scattered near the shed. "Dad, I used to think this was all too small, too ordinary. I used to feel embarrassed by it. But now I think this house has more love in it than any penthouse ever did. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." I nodded, not needing to add much, because the truth was shining in her eyes. As spring deepened, I realized something important. I no longer saw her as the daughter who had lost $40 million, but as the woman who had gained something far more valuable: self-respect, humility, and the courage to rebuild a broken relationship. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future where our bond wasn't defined by shame or betrayal, but by the quiet strength of forgiveness and growth. And as I watched Sophia laugh in my backyard, sunlight catching her hair the way it had when she was a child, I felt proud not of her inheritance, not of her wealth, but of the woman she was becoming, one choice at a time. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones we never planned to teach. Sophia thought wealth would shield her from consequences, that a glittering lifestyle could replace loyalty, and that status was more valuable than family. But when everything fell apart, when the cars were repossessed, the penthouse foreclosed, and the invitations stopped arriving, she was forced to confront a truth she had ignored for too long. Money can vanish overnight, but the way we treat people, the respect we give or withhold, shapes our legacy forever. What matters in the end isn't the size of your bank account or the brand stitched into your clothing. It's the relationships you nurture, the integrity you hold on to when it's tempting to compromise, and the character you reveal when life strips away the illusions. For me, the richest moment wasn't in a contract worth hundreds of millions or in watching skyscrapers rise under my company's name. It was in seeing my daughter, humbled and imperfect, begin to discover her own worth beyond dollar signs. Respect isn't inherited, and it isn't bought, it's earned, one choice at a time. And those choices, made in honesty or arrogance, ripple out farther than we ever imagine. If you've stayed with me through this journey, I want to thank you for listening. Stories like these aren't just about one family. They're reminders for all of us to value what truly matters, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. Before you go, if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships, your own values, or the lessons you want to leave behind, then please take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave us a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal the deeper truths hiding behind everyday lives. Until next time, remember, wealth fades, but respect endures.